in the smoky haze of a Chicago speakeasy. A young woman with bobbed hair and rolled stockings raises her glass of illegal gin, her kohl-rimmed eyes defying 1,000 years of feminine tradition. The year is 1925, and America is witnessing the birth of the most rebellious generation of women the world has ever seen. These are the flappers, and their story is far stranger, more dangerous, and more revolutionary than history books dare to tell. 100 years ago, the world stood at the crossroads of tradition and revolution. The Great War had ended, leaving behind a generation hungry for life, liberty, and the pursuit of everything their mothers had been denied. In America, the 19th Amendment had granted women the right to vote. And you also have the right to leave your comment and subscribe to the channel. Leave your like. Prohibition had made alcohol illegal but infinitely more desirable, and jazz music was painting the night in shades of rebellion. Into this intoxicating world stepped the flappers' young women who would shatter every convention, challenge every expectation, and rewrite the very definition of femininity. They were more than a fashion statement. They were a cultural earthquake that would rock American society to its very foundations. The birth of rebellion, the word flapper, didn't begin in the smoke-filled clubs of New York or the jazz halls of Chicago. It emerged from the foggy streets of Britain, describing young women who let their galoshes flap unbuckled as they walked. But, when the term crossed the Atlantic and landed in post-war America, it transformed into something far more powerful than a simple description of loose footwear. The year 1920 marked the cultural birth of the American flapper, with the release of the film The Flapper, starring Olive Thomas. Suddenly, every young woman in America had a name for the feeling that had been building inside them. The desperate need to be free, to be modern, to be anything but what their mothers had been. The movie screens flickered with images of a new kind of woman, and millions of girls sitting in darkened theaters felt their hearts quicken with recognition. This wasn't just about fashion or rebellion for its own sake. The flappers represented the first generation of American women to come of age in a world where they could vote, where they had witnessed the horrors of war, and where the old certainties had crumbled like ancient parchment. They were the daughters of a new age, and they intended to live like it. Nothing shocked conservative America quite like the sight of a young woman walking down Main Street with her hair shorn short in the Revolutionary bob cut. What we now call the classic Chanel cut was, in 1925, nothing short of scandalous. Hair had always been a woman's crowning glory, kept long and elaborately styled. To cut it short was to reject centuries of feminine tradition in a single, defiant snip of the scissors. The bob wasn't just a hairstyle. It was a declaration of war against the past. Women lined up at barbershops, not beauty salons, but actual barbershops, demanding to have their locks cut like men's. Horrified parents watched as their daughters emerged looking like entirely different people, their faces suddenly sharp and modern, their necks exposed in what seemed like brazen invitation. The short hair served a practical purpose too. The flappers were dancers, and their wild movements, the Charleston, the shimmy, the black bottom, required freedom of movement that long hair simply couldn't accommodate, as they spun and kicked and threw themselves into the frenzied rhythms of jazz. Their bob cuts flew around their faces like halos of rebellion, each strand a small act of defiance against the Victorian world their mothers inhabited. The flapper dress was revolutionary in its simplicity and shocking in its brevity. Where Victorian women had been wrapped in layers of fabric, corseted and bustled into immobility, the flapper wore a simple, straight-line dress that ended daringly just below the knee. The sight of a woman's legs in public was so scandalous that some cities actually passed ordinances attempting to regulate skirt length. These weren't the flowing gowns of their mother's generation. Flapper dresses were designed for movement, for dancing, for living. They hung loose on the body, creating a boyish silhouette that horrified traditionalists, who believed a woman's curves should be emphasized and celebrated. The flappers had no interest in celebrating their curves. They wanted to celebrate their freedom. The exposed legs weren't just about fashion. They were about mobility. For the first time in American history, young women were driving cars, riding bicycles, climbing stairs to speakeasies, and dancing until dawn. The long skirts and restrictive undergarments of the previous generation would have made such activities impossible. The flapper dress wasn't just clothing. It was liberation tailored and hemmed to fit a new kind of life. If the bob cut and short skirts were the flapper's uniform, then makeup was her war paint. In Canada, when respectable women wore little more than a touch of powder, flappers painted their faces with the bold strokes of artistic rebellion. But do you know what's a sign of rebellion? It's not having left a like yet. Like this video, turn on notifications, and subscribe to the channel. Dark kohl rimmed their eyes, bright red lipstick stained their lips, and rouge colored their cheeks in shades that would have made their grandmothers faint. The makeup wasn't subtle or natural, it was deliberate, dramatic, and designed to be noticed. They drew their eyebrows thin and dark, creating expressions of perpetual skepticism. They outlined their lips in Cupid's bows that seemed to mock the very idea of innocence. Every morning, as they stood before their mirrors, applying layer after layer of cosmetics, they were painting on a new identity. The jewelry was equally bold and unconventional. Long strands of pearls hung down to their waists, jangling and clicking as they moved. Bangles covered their arms, rings adorned their fingers, and headbands decorated with feathers or beads crowned their bobbed hair. They wore their accessories like armor, each piece a small shield against the disapproval of the older generation. Perhaps nothing symbolized the flapper's rejection of tradition quite like her refusal to wear stockings. In an era when showing a bare ankle was considered risk, flappers walked the streets with their legs completely exposed, flesh gleaming in the sunlight like a constant act of defiance. The decision to go bare-legged wasn't just about comfort or fashion, it was about economics and practicality. Stockings were expensive, and they tore easily during the vigorous dancing that defined flapper culture. Why spend money on something that would be destroyed in a single night at a speakeasy? The bare legs became a badge of practicality and rebellion combined. Conservative society reacted with horror and fascination. Newspaper editorials condemned the bare-legged brigade as symptoms of moral decay. Religious leaders sermonized against the shameless display of flesh. Yet the more society condemned them, the more liberated the flappers felt. Their bare legs were walking advertisements for a new kind of womanhood, one that refused to be covered, constrained, or ashamed. The sight of a young woman smoking in public was perhaps the most shocking behavior of the flappers. Cigarettes had been exclusively a male vice, associated with pool halls, saloons, and other masculine spaces. When flappers began lighting up in restaurants, at parties, and even on street corners, they weren't just inhaling tobacco, they were breathing in freedom. The cigarette became a prop in the flappers' performance of modernity. They held their cigarettes with studied casualness, letting smoke curl around their faces in sophisticated clouds. The act of smoking was slow, deliberate, sensual, everything that proper young ladies were taught not to be. Each puff was a small rebellion, each exhale a breath of independence. Even more scandalous was their relationship with alcohol during the height of Prohibition. While the rest of America was supposed to be dry, flappers were the life of every speakeasy party. They mixed cocktails with the skill of professional bartenders, danced on tables with drinks in their hands, and treated the 18th Amendment as little more than a suggestion. Their consumption of illegal alcohol wasn't just about having fun. It was about asserting their right to make their own choices, regardless of what the law or society demanded. The flappers and jazz music were inseparable, two revolutionary forces that fed off each other's energy and rebellion. In the smoky underground clubs where jazz was born, flappers were the high priestesses of a new religion, one that worshipped rhythm, spontaneity, and the pure joy of being alive. The Charlton wasn't just a dance. It was a physical manifestation of everything the flappers represented. The wild kicks, the swinging arms, the complete abandonment to the music. It all required a kind of physical and emotional freedom that previous generations of women had never experienced. As they danced, their beads flying and their hair whipping around their faces, they were literally shaking off the constraints of the past. The speakeasies became temples of this new culture, hidden behind unmarked doors and secret passwords. These illegal establishments offered more than just prohibited alcohol. They offered a space where the rules of conventional society didn't apply. In these dimly lit rooms, flappers could smoke, drink, dance, and be themselves without the constant judgment of disapproving elders. The speakeasy was the flapper's natural habitat, and she ruled it with the confidence of a queen. The more visible flappers became, the more intense grew the backlash against them. Conservative America was genuinely terrified by these young women who seemed to represent everything that was going wrong with post-war society. Newspaper editorials condemned them as superficial, materialistic, and morally bankrupt. Religious leaders warned that they were leading America toward spiritual destruction. The criticism wasn't limited to words. Some cities passed actual laws attempting to regulate flapper behavior. Banks refused service to women dressed in flapper fashion. Schools expelled students who showed up with bobbed hair or short skirts, and those who didn't leave a like weren't considered cool. So leave your like. The establishment was fighting back against the flapper revolution with every weapon at its disposal. But the attempts at suppression only made the flapper lifestyle more appealing to young women. Being forbidden made the clothes more desirable, the behavior more thrilling, the entire identity more intoxicating. Every act of censorship was met with an even more defiant display of flapper style. They had tasted freedom, and no amount of social pressure was going to make them give it up willingly. Behind the bold facades and rebellious behavior, the flappers were dealing with contradictions and pressures that history often overlooks. While they projected an image of complete sexual liberation, many struggled with the reality of newfound freedoms in a society that still fundamentally didn't know how to handle independent women. The job market of 1925 was beginning to open up to women, but the opportunities were still limited and often poorly paid. Many flappers worked as shopgirls, telephone operators, or secretaries, jobs that provided just enough independence to fund their evening adventures but not enough to ensure real economic security. The glamorous lifestyle often came at the cost of financial stability. The pressure to maintain the flapper image was also enormous. The makeup, the clothes, the accessories, the constant socializing. It all required money, energy, and an emotional resilience that not every young woman possessed. Some found themselves trapped in a performance of liberation that had become as constraining as the Victorian roles they had rejected. The freedom they celebrated in public sometimes masked a private uncertainty about what kind of women they were supposed to become. The party couldn't last forever. On October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday arrived like a cold wind that blew out all the candles of the Jazz Age. The stock market crash that triggered the Great Depression didn't just destroy financial portfolios. It demolished the entire cultural framework that had supported the flapper lifestyle. Suddenly, the hedonistic pursuit of pleasure seemed not just frivolous, but almost obscene in a world where millions were out of work and families were losing their homes. The short skirts and elaborate makeup that had symbolized freedom now seemed wasteful and inappropriate. The speaks were closed, not by law enforcement, but by economic necessity. The dancing stopped, the music faded, and the flappers found themselves relics of a vanished world. By 1932, the fashion magazines that had once celebrated flapper style were promoting longer skirts, more conservative makeup, and a return to sensible clothing. The women who had once been flappers adapted to the new reality, trading their beads for breadlines and their rebellion for survival. The age of the flapper was over, but the changes they had wrought in American society would prove to be permanent. They had shown that women could be independent, could make their own choices, and could define their own identities. That lesson would survive long after the last Charleston had been danced. The rise and fall of the flappers serves as a powerful reminder that not every cultural revolution leads to genuine progress. What appeared to be liberation in the glittering nights of 1925 revealed itself to be something far more fragile when tested by the harsh realities of economic collapse and social responsibility. The flapper phenomena teaches us a crucial lesson about the difference between freedom and license, between meaningful change and mere rebellion. While these young women believed they were breaking free from oppressive traditions, many found themselves trapped in a different kind of cage, one built from the pressure to constantly perform their liberation, to maintain an expensive and exhausting lifestyle that ultimately served no deeper purpose than shocking their elders. The traditions they so eagerly discarded, modesty, thrift, family devotion, and moral restraint, had evolved over centuries, not as tools of oppression, but as wisdom passed down through generations who understood what truly sustains human flourishing. When the Great Depression arrived, it was precisely these traditional values that helped families survive, while the flapper lifestyle crumbled like paper in the rain. We see this pattern repeated throughout history. Movements that mistake rebellion for progress, that confuse the breaking of boundaries with genuine freedom. The flapper story warns us to be cautious of cultural trends that promise liberation, but deliver only temporary excitement, followed by emptiness. True freedom isn't found in rejecting all constraints, but in choosing wisely which principles deserve our loyalty and which traditions have earned their place through time. The most sobering aspect of the flapper era is how quickly it all disappeared when real challenges arrived. The elaborate makeup, the expensive clothes, the constant partying, none of it provided any foundation for weathering life's inevitable storms. The women who adapted best to the harsh realities of the 1930s were often those who had maintained connections to more enduring values, even while experimenting with modern ideas. This doesn't mean all change is wrong, or that tradition should never be questioned. But the flapper story reminds us that lasting progress comes from building upon proven foundations, not from tearing everything down in pursuit of novelty. The most meaningful freedom is often found not in the absence of all rules, but in freely choosing to embrace principles that connect us to something greater than our immediate desires. The flapper era offers us a mirror in which to examine our own times. As we face our own cultural revolutions and changing social norms, we can learn from both their boldness and their mistakes. Sometimes the past's greatest gift isn't inspiration for revolution, but wisdom for building something that lasts. What traditions in your own life have proven their worth over time? Like this video, and subscribe for more explorations of history's most important lessons.